I think if you engage and empathise with your end users and all your stakeholders within your project very early on, really understand what's going through their mind and how they perceive things, that can help you refine your concept and idea to add as much value as possible very early on in the stage. It doesn't have to be sophisticated. Cardboard, paper, blue tack plasticine, if you can embody your concept and present it to potential end users, they can give you very rich, informative feedback very early on.
One of our mantras in design is fail fast and learn fast. You're probably going to get your first idea wrong. So how can you, instead of ploughing all your resources into your first prototype, make your first prototype cheaply, quickly, test it. You'll then observe some problems and some issues that you overlooked, that you just took for granted, some assumptions that were misguided. You can then go back to the lab, go back to the workshop, and then build a second prototype. And oh, thank God we didn't put all of our resources into that first one because, I don't know, ergonomically it wasn't quite right. The color of it wasn't quite right. These are all superficial things, but sometimes it can be more fundamental than that.
What we're talking more about when we're talking about human-centered design is more of a market pull aspect and approach, and really looking at what the market wants and needs and trying to service that need. So the solution, in a weird way, isn't the important part, it's the need, which is the center of what you should be worried about.
What we've seen is that design has allowed people to then take a step back and say, oh, I was wrong first time around. And it gives them the opportunity to then pivot. It gives them the opportunity to then tweak some things that they probably would have missed if they just started building their like solution anyway. So some of the best success stories from design are not necessarily these amazing innovative ideas, it's just we avoided catastrophe. So the importance of design in this context is let's make sure that we get it right before we actually go ahead and build the solution. And that's what this is about, really.
If you don't have the skill sets and experience that is necessary to execute your vision, try sourcing that. Go speak to bodies like KTN to see if they have within their network any companies that or individuals that they may be able to put you in touch with, or even invite you to certain events where you may be able to do that networking yourself and plug the holes in terms of the skill sets that you need to be able to produce your idea. Bodies like KTN provide the resources that convince senior executives, senior management to take a gamble and diminish the risk on taking that gamble for what could be quite innovative and novel developments and projects.
Welcome to the CHAP Soil Health Facilities here at Cranfield University. These facilities were set up in consultation with industry, farmers, agronomists, agribusinesses to address some of the key challenges in soil health management today. Soils are moving up the agenda, and certainly that is of concern for industry in terms of how soil quality, soil health affect crop growth. So we consulted with industry and they identified approximately 4 key areas where these soil health facilities can address some of their key issues. So the 4 industry concerns is, are we getting as much out of our soils as we possibly can to increase crop yield? We're interested in how we can manage soils better to enhance crop establishment and growth, and therefore marketable yield to farmers throughout the country. So these soil health facilities allow us to look at crop growth over the whole rotation. We start off by preparing the soil as would be done in the field. So this is the soil processor which prepares those boxes that you saw in the glass house earlier, and it allows us to carry out any sorts of tillage or cultivations that we want on those boxes when they're joined together. And then those boxes are carried out into the glass house where the crops begin to grow. We then sow the crops. We observe the establishment and growth of the crops within the glass house that we're standing in now. So this is one of the CHAP growth rooms where we can set the temperature, humidity, light to represent any season throughout the year. And these are our erosion trays where we're looking at the effect of erosion on plant establishment. But we're also looking at the effect of erosion on damaging the plant by splashback and contaminating those leaves, which then require the leaves to be washed, which adds cost to the process. Chris is taking an image of the roots at depth, and what we're able to see is how the roots are penetrating through that compacted layer, and you can see the density of those roots from this scan, so we can see how those roots are penetrating through that compaction layer. That information tells us that these cover crops are doing a good job at breaking up that compaction, making the soil physical structure much better for the follow-on crop. So we're delighted that Cranfield hosts some of the assets, the facilities of 2 of the Agritech centres that have been set up by the Agritech strategy. We have marriage between those 2 centres, and this comes in the fact that the AgriEpi hosts a phenotyping sensor platform. And what this allows us to do is to observe how crops grow over time. So we're interested in different moisture regimes. Here we have a very dry condition, and you can see that the soil is crusting, which makes that emergence very difficult. Whereas here we have a wet condition where we're irrigating the plants, and you can see the crusting is much less obvious, and those plants are doing much better. And we can monitor that using some of the phenotyping sensors that we use in collaboration with AgriEpi Centre. And that then leads itself to blend very well with the crop facilities which are growing the crop, but then we can analyse that crop in much more detail. AgriEpi also have some cool room facilities where we can store the crop post-harvest, and we can monitor the levels of gas within these cold rooms to ensure that we're keeping nutritional quality and flavour. And that makes these facilities unique, that we have a seamless path right from primary production to post-harvest technology. It is very much for industry to answer some of their key commercial questions. So we believe these soil health facilities for the first time allow farmers, agronomists and agribusinesses to really understand soil management issues and how that can impact on crop health and protection. And by combining the CHAP facilities with AgriEpi, we can observe those changes in crop health over space and time.
Good morning. I'm Jane Brookman from the KTN, and I would like to welcome you to the final day of the GCRF AgriFood Africa West virtual mission, indeed to the final day of the first group of missions across South, East and West. We finished this week off with some networking and a roundtable discussion on the region and items that may have come up during the week. I will introduce our panel shortly, but first I would like to say, if you have any questions for our panelists, please put them in the chat box on Facebook or YouTube, and we'll try to answer as many as we have time for. If you use Twitter, please use the hashtag AgriFoodAfrica. Next, our activities will be going forwards on the follow-up programme from the 13th of July. And you can find out more about this on the website. We will provide targeted help for creating consortia for agri-tech catalyst applications, clinics for helping with the application process itself, and theme sessions for further community building and networking. So it's now my very great pleasure to introduce today's panel. I'll just go through them and then I'll ask each person to introduce themselves. But we have Edwin Zukoji, from the Executive Director of Social Farm from Ghana, Ben Bennett from the Natural Resources Institute, the University of Greenwich, and Callum Murray, Head of Agriculture and Food at Innovate. So can I go to Edwin first to just very briefly introduce yourself?
Thank you so much, Jane. I'm happy to be talking to you from Ghana, and I work as the Social Farm Executive Director. This is a network of young people and women, especially in agribusiness, and we seek to use agribusiness to transform Africa's story from poverty to wealth. Thank you.
Thanks, Edwin. May I now go to Ben Bennett.
Hi, Jane. My name is Professor Ben Bennett. I'm Deputy Director of the Natural Resources Institute at Greenwich in the UK. I'm an economist and I'm interested in how trade and markets work for the poorest.
Thanks, Ben. And then finally to Callum Murray.
Good morning, Jane. Good morning, everybody. Yeah, I'm Callum Murray. I'm Head of Agriculture and Food at Innovate UK, which is part of UK Research and Innovation. And we're the government agency that's responsible for distributing the funding that's been made available through the Agri-Tech Catalyst and the GCRF programme that relates to Agri-Tech Africa.
Thanks, Callum. Edwin, may I start with you? Your company, as you said in your introduction, helps people who want to farm to succeed, and you have a focus on youth entrance and women to come into the sector. So I guess it's a little bit of a philosophical question, but if you could fix just one thing about the current system that you have to work in, what would it be and why?
Well, my interest would be for us to fix that mindset of thinking that fixing one thing will solve everything. Agribusiness or agriculture requires that holistic approach because we require energy to fix agribusiness or to produce food. We were just discussing about transportation. That is a major area that impacts on food production and distribution. So that also has to be fixed. I was talking about finance to smallholder farmers, to women farmers. That is an area that also requires to be fixed. So I would say we require that kind of thinking that brings up on board different aspects, be it finance, be it energy, be it transportation, in that holistic manner to solve agribusiness challenges. Thank you.
Thanks, Edwin. And, you know, I guess I deserved that response, really, didn't I, asking for a magic wand? But so I think that's a very fair point, that all of these things are very much interrelated. So if you think about that, you've got to start somewhere. So you have to, and maybe you have to start by taking quite small steps to try and progress. So who should pay for all of these sorts of things? You know, so should it be that, like, the progress has to be spread, that the responsibility has to be spread as well, do you think?
Yes, so the initiative actually to start business or agribusiness emanates from the farmer, the individual, that woman out there who wants to start a business to earn income and also transform the local economy and also look after the children and the family as a whole. So that is an initial initiative from the individual, but also requires a holistic approach from other relevant players in the industry or in the economy, be it from academia or the research institutions, be it from government or policymakers, as well as other private players like the financial institutions and industry. So I believe that taking that first step as a woman to provide food for the family and for the economy is relevant, but also requires other people on board to come and support.
Thanks very much, Edwin. So, Ben, we're talking about some of the barriers and the to the development of the food system, and within Ghana in Edwin's case. But what you spend a lot of your time talking to us over these last few weeks on the opportunities and barriers to trade between African states, and I guess in much the same way as Edwin's magic wand, which do you think is likely to provide a solution for some of these barriers? Is it going to be diplomacy, or is it going to be technology that's going to help us try and make these things happen more frequently and more effectively for the food system?
I think it's an attractive debate to look at technology versus diplomacy, and many people might think that, you know, with the Internet of Things and mobile phones spreading so readily and so successfully in parts of Africa, that actually technical solutions might be the problem to opening up trade. Might be the solution to open up trade. I fear that there are some founding issues that still need to be resolved. And if I was going to suggest, one area that in my experience has really made a huge difference, if I look at countries which have agricultural sectors that are really well organized, often they're commercial, but if they're really well organized and they have sector associations and they go to government meetings and they hold their trade negotiators and their ministries of trade to account, they do better. So if, for example, a great example of this is, I know it's historic, is South Africa. So South Africa is incredibly well organized. They have really, really strong trade associations. They take levies from their farmers and they use that money really wisely to push policy. And that drives the government of South Africa to find market access for them. You know, if that kind of grassroots organization happened amongst farmers associations and commodity associations, I think they would speed up, they would accelerate the process of market access really dramatically. I think it's a really, really powerful tool to making a difference to what really matters to agricultural sectors. Unfortunately, it tends to be commercial farmers that shout loudest because they've got most money. But getting organized and pushing your government to make the changes that you need is really likely to cause the biggest impact in trade.
Thanks, Ben. Edwin, would you care to comment on Ben's views or Ben's statements there in terms of how you see the situation in Ghana?
Yes. So I like the very point about the trade associations and Chamber of Commerces, especially those working along the whole value chain of agribusiness. I also happen to be the trade lead for the Ghana Chamber of Agribusiness, and that is one of the major things that we do in terms of working with government, trade advocacy, policy advocacy, what have you. So I think that's a fantastic point about coming together as a union or in unison, and also demanding for these interventions from government or the other stakeholders. So I'm in love with what he has said. Thank you.
Thanks, Edwin. Callum, if we come across now, so obviously the other part of the equation, which is of interest to you, is the innovation piece and the role of innovation in solving some of these challenges. How have Innovate UK tried to actually sort of engage with African states in terms of supporting change through innovation in this way?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Jane. I think the amount that we've learned over these last 2 or 3 weeks has just been incredible. You know, the extent of the challenges that exist that Ben has spoken about in terms of the trade, the infrastructure challenges, the social and cultural challenges. It's enormous, and I, for one, certainly have learned a huge amount. But there are so many opportunities that have come from the development of technologies, be it around genomics, be it around sensors, electronics, photonics, be it around Earth observation, the fintech opportunities, but also recognizing the social and cultural challenges that come through. These are all huge, huge considerations, and it's incumbent on us to properly engage with the stakeholders in each individual country that we're dealing with to identify where the priorities are. I love the point that Edwin made, that you know if you fix one thing, you fix everything. No, absolutely not the case. We need to have this integrated approach to everything we do. We need an integrated approach to pest management, for example, where there's no one clear-cut solution. But so many of the projects that we're dealing with embrace these new developments, the developments that cover advanced breeding technologies, the technologies that come in to consider the genomics, highlighting the need to truly understand the interaction of traits with the environment in which they're operating, and select on that basis. And then, of course, recognize the way in which you take these products through to market with the processing and manufacturing, and thinking about alternative proteins and so on. So there's just a massive amount that we can do. And how we integrate is to work, of course, with those that know much better than me some of the challenges and have an infrastructure. So working with DFID and with people on the ground, and working with your team in the KTN and establishing offices to understand what it is that we can do to drive the skills agenda, for example, is another area that we need to give real consideration to. So what I think we are fully behind is this idea of collaboration, of seeing challenge-led opportunities funded as best we can. It's a finite pot of money, so by definition it needs to go through a competitive process, so that we're ensured that we're really funding the absolute best and most pertinent projects as they relate to the cultures and the environments and the challenges that exist in these different countries. So there's not an easy answer. I'm going to take Edwin's lead here and say that I'll cover all bases and all things, but recognizing that if we can give individual economies the tools to produce things more efficiently, driving resource use efficiency in a way that benefits both the individuals, benefits the businesses, benefits the economy as a whole, and importantly, maintains a sustainable approach to production. These are all aspects that I want to see embedded in the activities that we take forward.
Thanks, Callum. Now, Edwin, Callum talked about skills and how one part of the programme that we're working on is around that area. And within Europe, it's often said that informal learning or peer-to-peer type learning is the key to adoption of new farming practices within Europe. What do you think in terms of your experience in Ghana? Do you think that technologies and business models are best adopted through peer-to-peer or informal learning, or do you think a more formal approach works better?
Yes, a mix of these works. So, for instance, projects that involve practical demonstrations on the site or the farmland would inform athletes through observation people will pick up new skill sets and what have you. Now, a lot of smallholder farmers who are women will require to have physical evidence of the new seeds that may be introduced through research or what have you. So it is this kind of experience or experiential learning that will support such a smallholder farmer to adopt a new seed or a new technology. And based on the evidence or result from that kind of new use of technology, this new woman will take this information, a new skill set, and transfer to other smallholder farmers in that community. So I believe that peer-to-peer learning works so much, as well as any other classroom learning, at least for academics, for researchers, that will fit into their modes of learning and skill acquisition. Indeed, a lot of the skills acquisitions or trainings have been mismatched, as in you are giving it to somebody who may be an academic or a researcher who doesn't have any linkage to even the smallholder farmer who does that activity on a daily basis. You are producing a new technology without even involving the woman who is daily doing the farming or the production. So a lot of the research and activities that are done are done just at the back room of a researcher with that interaction with the beneficiaries or the end user or that kind of innovation. So a lot of our recommendation these days is get to the field, talk to the final user, talk to the women especially, because in Africa, a lot of the farmers, the producers are the women. And when they hook up to technology, when they get results, they are easy to transfer that same skill sets and knowledge to other women across board. So it gets easily propagated. So that is one of the models that we try to tell researchers from UK, get to the root. Perhaps you are here for research and you spend briefly some few months or weeks and you are gone. But the interventions will last a lifetime. So spend a lot of time talking to the people on the field, the smallholder farmer, the woman farmer who is involved in daily activities. Thank you.
Thanks, Edwin. Now, Ben, I'd like to come to you for a comment, because I'm very much aware that the Natural Resources Institute has very much an end user focus to much of their research. So I'd quite like just if you've got any additional comments you'd like to add to Edwin's statement.
No, there's a very interesting conversation going on amongst my colleagues at NRI at the moment. We're all running projects in many different countries, many in Ghana, Edwin, and I run projects myself. And that immersion in understanding the lives of people in rural areas is an essential part of the kind of feedback loop for research that makes it work and grounds us in the reality of the field. And we're very worried that post COVID-19, certainly for a period of time, we will start to be running projects and interactions that are like this, and that's fine, but it won't work in terms of that great bit of serendipity you get sometimes when you go to the field and you talk to a farmer and you just learn something that's deep and wise that you wouldn't have learned by sitting at home and looking down a screen. So I think we will have a hiatus in that loop in the next year or so, and we need to think very carefully about the approaches that we take to research and fieldwork that are both safe for everybody involved, but also continue to have that very important feedback loop of knowledge and wisdom from the field. So yeah, it's a big concern. I know we're thinking about it. I'm talking to colleagues in the CG system, also worried about this issue. We're clever folk. Hopefully, we'll come up with some clever solution.
Thanks, Ben. Now, you talked about the COVID-19, which is obviously the latest concern that many of us have in terms of engagement with end users. One of the other sort of underlying changes that's happened over the last 20 years is that of climate change. So I'm going to come to Edwin on this in a moment as well, but how do you see the problems that you're trying to help with, and the solutions that you are trying to suggest changing with respect to climate change in West Africa, Ben?
Oh, I think it's a serious problem. I've been looking quite a lot at livestock trade recently in West Africa, and it's very stark, the impact of climate change and climate shock in the livestock sector, perhaps bringing it back to the trade issue. One's still very shocked to find countries with major producers of cattle who are exporting them on the hoof and not processing them locally. And in this modern world, it just astonishes me that governments still allow large amounts of animals to walk across borders, when the opportunity to be so simple to add that value within the country. It's not a hard thing to do. And I think the effort to reconcentrate our policies on chains that genuinely add value and chains that bring out the very best in the agricultural economy and stimulate the areas where you've got advantage. Governments need to align those efforts to bits of their geography where we know that they're going to suffer from climate shocks.
Thanks, Ben. Just very quickly to go across to your thoughts on that, Edwin, in terms of not necessarily about the livestock, but how you feel that climate change is affecting your job.
Yes, climate change is one of the major challenges in the agribusiness, especially the crop production area. So there is a lot in thinking around what the interventions are. Indeed, in Ghana, most of our production, as I said, is rain-fed. So what kind of interventions are we looking at? Solar-powered irrigation systems are the kind of interventions that a lot of smallholder farmers have seen as a change maker in their production cycle. So here comes my other thinking, that the relevance of energy as a factor in production. So how do we tap the huge source of energy that we have in a climate-friendly way to do agribusiness? That is the way we are looking at. So how do I assess, instead of using fossil fuel energy in my production, how do I use solar-powered irrigation system to do an all-year-round vegetable production for export to even UK? So these are the kind of thinking that a smallholder farmer out there is looking at. But how can innovation, technology make that easier, simpler, and cheaper for the smallholder farmer? So these are the thinking that I think you need to brainstorm around much more in terms of that as a solution or as an intervention to mitigate the challenges from climate change.
Okay, so we also have a question from Rob Smallfit, who I'd like to start with asking you, Edwin, on this. Following on from our discussion about peer-to-peer learning, he says that, is peer-to-peer learning not the underlying reason for the success of franchising? And so, moving on from that, would it be possible for micro-franchising to be a means to create businesses out of people who don't have business skills? So, could you use that as a methodology to actually get successful businesses off the ground?
Yes, so obviously those are models that will work obviously in Ghana. So if it is about, as I mentioned, solar-powered irrigation systems, you get smallholder franchises in different localities or communities to be your franchisor or franchisee in that community and promote your solutions to other smallholder farmers. So these are fantastic models that will work in Ghana and in Africa as a whole.
Thanks, Edwin. I have a question now from Victor Laurie for Ben and Callum. What do you think are the reasons why livestock production, especially ruminant production, seems to be stagnated and has hardly evolved from the traditional forms over all these years?
Well, maybe I can kick off with that. I mean, there are veterinary reasons why it's difficult to move livestock from one place to the other. So you need a lot of infrastructure and a lot of organization to gain market access for livestock. But there seems to have been a kind of general underinvestment in livestock processing. This can be driven by policy. Governments can organize themselves if they really want to grow their ruminant sector. They can encourage domestic processing and domestic value addition. This is often, there's a lot of countries where this is simply missing in the traditional livestock economy. So I think it's a big opportunity.
So that's to your point that you made earlier regarding the sort of lack of processing and the formats for actually moving livestock on the hoof rather than killing them.
There are some countries in Africa that noticed that they had. I won't name names, but there are some countries that noticed that they had significant exports of ruminants and simply implemented a policy that they would not export anything on the hoof, but at the same time offered government support to get processing up and running within a certain period of time. So, it was a comprehensive policy to promote domestic value addition.
Yeah. And as Edwin said, it addressed the whole issue rather than just stopping one piece. So, Callum, would you like to respond to Victor's question?
Victor, I don't think this challenge is something that's restricted to whichever country you're speaking from, and certainly from the continent of Africa as a whole. Here in the UK, ruminant production is a real challenge in terms of trying to drive productivity and quality and so on. And the feedback loops to producers, ensuring that they understand the impact of management changes, that allows them to embrace new technologies, that allows them to think not just about the resilience to the environment in which they're working, but start thinking about the opportunities to improve the traits of the breeds that are there to drive eating quality, to think about nutrition. All of that is a consideration that requires the supply chain to embed communication, to allow the feedback to demonstrate to the producers concerned how the value of their individual products can be improved at an individual per head or per carcass basis, respecting what Ben's just been saying. So it's very challenging, it's very expensive to do, and I think strategically it takes a decision where policy is something that helps drive the agenda here, because fundamentally the amount of money that exists in that ruminant livestock sector to drive complex, sophisticated research is quite a difficult thing to do. But respecting cultures, be it in Scotland or be it in Ghana, is something that's very important in livestock production.
Thanks very much, Callum. And I'd just like to finish this conversation off with a short sort of journey into, as Ben has nicely put it, technology jumping. So the question is, we've talked over this last week about infrastructure challenges being quite difficult within Africa, and whereas when there's an awful lot of technological change happening, which would maybe almost make it irrelevant to sort of follow the patterns that maybe other economies have followed. Could we just jump to a new solution? So, rather than thinking about putting power lines up, why not just think about localized power generation, for example? So just would be really interested in people's thoughts on that. Maybe if we start with Ben, then go to Edwin and follow off with Callum. So Ben, have you got any thoughts on that?
Yeah, sure. I mean, there's been another conversation going on in the background with a few of the people that have been listening to this, which I've been trying to respond to when I can. But My views are perhaps a little bit radical on this. I think if you want to get to really, really large numbers of people, there's certain fundamental infrastructure that you absolutely need. You know, we've had successful mobile phone, but that's because we've had mobile phone infrastructure across Africa. I still think if you really want to have local agro-processing and movement of food quickly to markets, we're still going to need to have rural roads and rural electrification. So, you know, it's all of these technologies that take the processing to the farm, or take the process to the farm, all brilliant ideas, but they won't get to hundreds of millions of people straight away. They'll get to certain focused people in very isolated spots. So for the last mile, I can see these technologies being really useful. But for the first set of miles, actually the basic infrastructure that we're all used to around the world is still absolutely necessary across rural Africa.
Thanks, Ben. Edwin, would you like to add your thoughts?
Yes, so the issue about technology and its adoption in Ghana is one that I would say is quick and fast. Indeed, Africa, and Ghana in particular, is one of the fastest area in technology adoption, even with mobile phone usage. So it does mean that if we gradually understand and get to hook up to a technology that is useful and actually helping us get the results that we need, indeed, we adopt and use them efficiently. So there's no hard, fast rule about it. It's about its benefit to our economy and the community as a whole. And for us as farmers, any technology that will help us improve our yield, get more revenue and income is of prime importance to us. Thank you.
Well, thanks very much for that, Edwin. And to be honest with you, unless Callum feels he has anything particularly you'd like to say on that.
Well, I would just very quickly, Jane, if I may, I think the whole issue of this challenge is that what we need to have is an infrastructure that's resilient to shocks. And these shocks are going to come in various different forms. They'll come in the form of cultural, it'll be climatic, of course, it'll be the whole thing of political shocks that come through. So having an infrastructure that's resilient to that, and to have the maintenance and support mechanisms in place to look after whatever new technologies are brought into play as well. All of these things have to be embedded into the approach that we take to delivering the infrastructure that's required. So at this point, I think that's all I'd like to say.
That's really helpful. Thank you. Right. Well, our time together is over, I fear. So thank you all for the really good and interesting responses that you've given this morning. I would like to thank everybody who's listened in at all over the last 3 weeks, and we look forward to delivering our next set of work on the innovation missions, which is going to be around, as I said, more practical aspects of helping you to maybe get some of the funding that we're going to be launching in early July. So for now, I'd like to thank everyone for listening. I'd like to thank the panelists for attending and giving us such interesting insights. Thank you. Goodbye.